Oh,
Oh, good. Yes. So this is the chapel. This is the chapel. When they envisioned this, they bought a picture. Woods on both sides. The vision had, so there's a path through the wilderness. So after you left. I thought it was 10. No, it's 10. Oh, wow. Good for you, Gary.
Morning. I am happy to welcome Pam Brubaker, who was. You're not hearing me. I'm happy to welcome Pam Brubaker. I knew Pam because we were in college together, and I read some things about a book she had published and thought, we've got to get Pam here to speak at Seniors for Peace. Pam remembers, and her sister Bev, we welcome as well. They remember a number of people from when they were in college here, and including David Waz. Pam's eager to visit with him. After Pam attended Manchester from 1964 to 66, and then she joined Brethren Volunteer Service and went to Chicago, where she finished her undergraduate degree. She then got a master's degree from United Theological Seminary in Dayton, Ohio in 1980, and her PhD in religion and social ethics from Union Theological Seminary in New York in 1989. Pam is the author, and this is the book that caught my attention, of Globalization at What Price? Economic Change and Daily Life. Along with that, she wrote a chapter in a book titled Valuing Lives, Healing Earth, Religion, Gender, and Life on Earth. And that chapter is titled Indigenous Women Act to Defend Mother Earth, Empowerment and Solidarity. Pam will share from her experiences with that are, as a part of that chapter in the book, experiences in Latin America. From 1994 to 2012, Pam taught religion and social ethics at California Lutheran University in Thousand Oaks, California. She has served with many non-governmental organizations and worked with the World Council of Churches, where she served on an advisory group on economic justice, and she co-edited a book, Justice, Not Greed. We've spent a good bit of time this morning sharing our experiences living in retirement communities. Pam lives in Moravian Village in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and flew here to join us. I'm very grateful. Thank you, Pam.
Thank you. Oh, I gotta turn it on.
Yeah.
I think it's on, Pam. No, it's not. Slide it, right?
Got it.
Thank you. I'm not good at that. When I was teaching, my students could hear me. Yes. So I am really delighted to be here. When Jan invited me, I thought I would like to do that because my 2 years at Manchester College from 64 to 66 means so much to me. And David Wass and Ken Brown were some of my favorite teachers. And when I became like a college professor, I would sometimes remember how David Wass talked to his students. And I used that way of doing it because it was such a good way of engaging the students. So even though I don't, I'm not near a Church of the Brethren, I'm visiting with the Moravians in Bethlehem. But, I'm still the Church of the Brethren at heart. And it helped me be who I was. And like probably many of you, my dad was a conscientious objector in the Second World War. So I'm a peace and justice professor, as Jan said. And in part, I think that came about when we live in Southwest Ohio, and I was on the district cabinet then. And we were making plans for a speaker, and guess who came? Benton Rhodes came and talked with us about, agricultural missions and other things. And it just really helped me to see what I would like to do and be from that. So then, as Jan said, after 2 years at Manchester, I did go back to Chicago to work in BVS. And most of the people in Chicago then, how many of you been to Chicago, to this area, right? So, most of them were in that area. And it had changed so much before the seminary moved, to the suburbs. My family went up because our pastor's daughter and husband were going there for Bethany Seminary. And then when I go back for BVS, and then something that I'll talk about in just a minute that was in between that time, and it was just so interesting about what was happening there. And so, how many of you know about? Excuse me, sometimes it takes me a while to get to what I want to say. The 65 summer, I think a few people said they knew about it. So what happened was when Bethany Seminary moved to the suburbs, the Ecumenical Institute bought that whole area. And so how many of you know about the Ecumenical Institute? Okay, right. So they decided that they were going to, the families that were going to live there who were working in the community, and they had felt, and this is interesting because the Ecumenical Institute was actually founded in part by, give me a minute here, I'm sorry, the World Council of Churches. So that was my first, meeting up with them. And she talked about, all the years and later that I worked there. And I was the only one of students, 48 students who went there, who was from the Church of the Brethren. So this is now the Ecumenical Institute, and in '65 they started moving in to where the seminary had been, and when I was there, it really changed because not having the seminary there. So we had projects that we did for our time there. And I was with a group that was going around the community to knock on doors and meet women who were raising children there, and wanting them to know that we had this program now at what had been the seminary, and we would like them to come and their children could come and all this. And some of the people would say, "You mean the seminary's not there anymore?" So here I am, from the Church of the Brethren, and thinking it was a little bit, I think, sad in some ways, but that they left. But I understand why they did. But there was still the church and the hospital, and so most of the BVSers, which is what I did a year later, worked in the hospitals. I may say that I worked at the church with youth and adults, and I really love that. So anyway, when the applications went out to a lot of colleges asking for them to come and spend 6 weeks at the Ecumenical Institute and doing different things. So as I think I said, I was the only one from the Church of the Brethren who went. I was told by the chaplain, this would be a good thing to do. And I asked my parents, and they said, okay, because, they had been up there before. And it was such, in some ways, a surprise to see what had happened now. But then you may know there were 29 families who lived there and did different kinds of work for different tasks. And only one family was from the Church of the Brethren. So part of why I'm saying that, it's interesting to me that, that was kind of our home base, one of them, and that they weren't in the area anymore. But the summer of '65, I called it kind of mind-blowing, because they were really looking at what had happened in Chicago, and there was a religious organization in Chicago that was working with the Ecumenical Institute. They said in that neighborhood, that was the most dangerous, and it's true, it was the most dangerous part of Chicago. It had the highest rates of killings and the lowest income. So they felt like they were called to help change that. And they set up, this is the Ecumenical Institute, how they wanted to do that. So I was really impressed then that you may know, some people don't know, that Martin Luther King and his family moved to Chicago that year. How many of you knew that? Yeah, they did. They were, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference was asked to come up by some of the religious groups in Chicago, because they thought that what they had learned from in the South, they could help out here. So we were on the west side, as I said, the highest killings and the lowest income. And Martin Luther King would visit different communities. So one day he was right in our neighborhood by where the hospital was. And about 10 of us went out to hear him speak. this was so exciting because it's like, here we are, and then there's a big room like this, but it was outdoors, of Black people from the community, and we could see them kind of looking at us like, who are these people? And Martin Luther King was really speaking to that neighborhood, and he told them, we can't keep blaming everything on Whitey. It was interesting how he talked about that, because, you know, we're in some ways, we're at fault too. And he said, you've got to pick up your beds and walk. And it was so inspiring. And so then some of the people came over and asked us who we were. And we said, well, we work here, you know, with Brethren Volunteer Service. So they were very happy to meet up with us. So I now knew definitely what I wanted to do in my life. You know, I wanted to do peace and justice, which we all do. And I wanted to do it in those ways. And then when I became, I remember when I graduated in '68, and I'm sure you all remember this too, when Martin Luther King was assassinated. And that neighborhood where the hospital was, there were riots. I had now lived in the suburbs where the New Bethany was. And people came out and said, you will not hurt this hospital. They have been here. They've stayed with us. They take care of us, whether we have money or not. So it was not harmed at all. So I just find, you know, this a very interesting part of the history in the Church of the Brethren and the way that it's, you know, tied up. And then, as I said, I knew what I wanted to do. So I was an elementary teacher, but I was always, my husband and I were activists, you know, and went to church and all that. And we worked with the youth group in First Church. And this was interesting too, because the youth, you know, the church then, and it made sense, wanted to get the Black churches and the white churches more related to each other. And so they would say, come out and visit us where we are. And so after a period of time, the students said to Jack and me, the next time somebody asks, tell them they have to come here where we live and be with us. So then they were interested in Manchester. So we drove a group of them to Manchester College, then, not university, and they were talking, and we went to talk to other people, and some of them came up to us, and they said, hey, you left us here all by ourselves. So I'm just talking about some of the ways that, you know, working in peace and justice, and how do you work with different communities, racial communities, you know, one who's been oppressed, and then the other who may have been the oppressor. So I could get involved in things yet I wasn't like a professor. Okay, so now I want to talk just a little bit more about the World Council of Churches. So I'm sure you're all, you know, connected with that. So I was very interested in some of this social justice work in money, you know, and what was happening in that way, which not a lot of people were. So I took 2 courses at the New School for Social Research when I was at Theological Seminary, and they were looking at, you know, what was happening in terms of people's ability to support themselves and that. This was a real issue, and we're still facing that issue, aren't we? You know, a lot of people who are displaced, you know, there's this argument now whether you say they're just sitting in the streets or were they displaced people. So we were working some on that as an issue, and then looking at from a point of view that was not just capitalist, but where you might have called socialist. And, you know, some people don't like that word at all. But, you know, going there and taking these 2 courses, I learned a lot. And so when I got into really working on these issues, I think first it was unusual for a woman to be doing that. That was usually something that the men would speak out about. And I did my dissertation on issues around justice on politics and money. And I had written, as she said, a couple books. My dissertation actually looked, I had been with the United Nations, had a women's decade, and it was in Kenya. And I was able to, my sister helped, and I got some money from the church, not the church, the university, and I went and to the one from the UN. And it was amazing because you had all these women, and there were some men there from all over the world here focusing in on the issues. And, you know, the role of women, their place in the home, other things that they can do. And it was really very interesting to be there. And then I went to, we were there for a couple weeks, and we could go meet in a lot of different groups. So I wrote about all the women and how at that point in time, the churches were not very opening to women getting too involved. At least that's what kind of thing I was hearing. And then I was also hearing from the people in the global South who felt like the global North doesn't really pay enough attention to them and their needs. So, you know, we were working all on that. So that was then kind of led then to, if you haven't seen it, this is my Globalization at What Price? And the first edition came out in 2001. And I was writing about economic change and daily life. And we were asking different questions about what is good about this globalization. There wasn't a rejection of globalization, but there was the idea of who's going to benefit from this. And there was a lot of evidence that who benefit. The wealthy North, you know, benefited from that. And there was the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. You know, they were being called out by some religious groups and other groups because they felt like the work that they were doing was causing more harm to some of the poorer parts of the world. And so that was a project then that the World Council of Churches took on, and they called it AGAPE, Alternative Globalization Addressing People and the Earth. So we're looking, you know, at the issues around the Earth, you know, and all that, as well as the other. And so the World Bank wanted the Council of Churches to vote for supporting the programs they were doing. And Rogate, who was from Africa and had his doctorate from in Europe, and he was the one who was working in all this at the World Council of Churches, and he's the one then that put my name in when the book he did on Greek, not, what was it? Help me.
Greed not, or justice not.
Justice not, yeah, not greed. And it was like they were putting so much pressure on to what we needed to do. And there was a women's group that was working with this, and there were representatives for each part, you know, of the world. And then there was also a general group that was working on this agape. So there was a lot of pressure to come on, and Rogati said, well, we will talk to you, but we're not going to support that. So they weren't too happy about that. And then the IMF was raising debts in countries, poor countries who had been colonized, and now they're out there and they're in debt, and how can they, have a just life? So these were issues that we were looking at and trying to address that and get a lot of international support for it. And there was other groups that worked on that. So when they saw my book, I was really kind of surprised. I was the only one there from the U.S. that was a part of this group, because this group that lasted for 7 to 10 years, we kept meeting through that period of time. And the global South churches in the late 1900s said, why do the people in the northern churches not understand what's happening to us? So, you can be a little, well, gee, we thought we were doing all right. We care about you, but they were wanting us to think more about them and to have more equality between us. And so we would, each year, we would go for like a week to a different part of the world. So over that period of time, and then when later, as she said, I got very active on peace and justice issues in Central America, I was in 30 countries. And that was amazing. I never thought that I would, do that. But we would be in different countries, and the people from that region would be meeting with us. And we learned at times how some people were able to make things better by certain kinds of support. And so they would do things, and this would be a little bit controversial, but where they tried this, and you would give poor families money to, to have a better house, to have a better life. And that was very meaningful for that to happen. And people thought, and this is, I think, sometimes debated in our country too, well, if they get that money, they're just going to waste it on things, right? You hear that sometimes? They won't take good care. But when the scholars went in and analyzed all this, these people were doing very well. They were building better houses, schools and things like that. They weren't just wasting the money, because one of the questions that the last part of the book is about, Jan commented some on this. Just let me find it. Can we really make a difference? That was what we were asking. Could we, as this is for people of faith, but in the chapters, there's, just to give you a sense of it, excuse me a minute here. Okay, the first chapter is just what is globalization anyway. The second one is, what's globalization got to do with our daily life? Third, what does faith have to do with globalization? And the fourth, what can we do? And the fifth, can we really make a difference? So you can make a difference. We can make a difference. And I know the Church of the Brethren, because I still, I don't live in an area where one's 20 miles away, but it's my roots. A lot of churches are working on these issues, aren't they? But we need to, also try to draw in more people from the community and the churches. So one of the things that happened then with this agape is that we had, every 7 years there would be a full 2 weeks of representatives from all the part of the world to the World Council of Churches, and hear things and then make decisions. And that's when the decision was made, voted on, that we were going to do this agape program, alternative globalization, addressing people and the earth. And the person who was representing the IMF made a presentation of about what everything we were doing was wrong. Really. Sometimes they got a little arrogant, and we looked and said, "What? Yes." And Joseph Stiglitz, I don't know if any of you follow these people that write about these academic and issues on money and that, had written some books about how, and he worked for a while, how we have to do better about making loans to poorer countries. And then also sometimes, they had odious money. That, like, for the countries that were colonized, like France and others, who had to pay when they became independent? They were expected to pay money back to the France and other places. Is that a right thing to do? So that was one of the issues. So anyway, this one from the IMF, so just because Joseph Stiglitz knows about that doesn't mean he understands what this really is about. And it was like, oh my, so he leaves, didn't even stay to listen to us. And I came next, and I had been asked to write, about, I think, maybe 4 or 5 pages or whatever for that. And I had the latest report from the International Monetary Fund on these plans they had had for the last 5 years that they thought they would make things better for people. Guess what? It failed. It failed. And then there was a director of the, are you all interested in this? I hope, yeah. The International, Monetary Fund, they did try to get in. They had someone who was the new leader, and he wanted to make some changes so it would be fair. He was fired. He was fired. So we're still, struggling with these kinds of issues about peace and justice, the environment, the styles of living. And so that when this first came out, this was, I said 2001, I hadn't yet been working like as much as I did later. It was about this, let's see, it was about the second time that I got asked to be a part of. They were creating these programs, Agape, and as I said, I was with a group of women working on it, and then this bigger group. So the last chapter changed so much because I could talk so much about what had happened in the last 6 years. And I want to read one of the things that was said here. We talked about solidarity. Do you talk about solidarity much? Yeah, I know a lot of people in the U.S. don't, we relate to people, but, solidarity is working with people. And when I would go in like these different countries, or when I was going into Central America, they said, we want solidarity. That means you stand with us. It's a little stronger there. So it says, building just and sustainable communities around the world will continue to demand solidarity from those of us who are committed to a new world for all of us. Effective solidarity requires precipitation in communities that nurture dialogue across difference, critical consciousness and compassion, and practices of resistance and accountability. Solidarity also requires heart. That, this was what I came up with that. When I thought about it, you have a heart. We all have hearts. We love and we want to help. So let's think about that. And I said I would like to call the ethic that I have attempted to develop in this book an ethic of heart. When I think of people practicing solidarity, I think of people with hearts that are tender, warm, caring, passionate, strong, brave, of people who hearten each other in the face of heartbreaking realities, of many hearts beating in rhythm with the heart of the universe. Heart is a good symbol for some of the distinctive contributions feminist ethics brings to ethics for just and sustainable community, emotion, relationality, and care. Stout heart, clear eyes, open ears, dirty hands, all are essential for our common talk. Now let's see. Talk a little bit more. We can start having some questions now if you want. You have a lot of questions, or I can say some more things. Yes?
Why did that organization fail?
What?
You said it failed after 5 years.
The IMF.
Yes, the IMF, right? The plans that they set out that they thought would reduce all the poverty didn't work. I don't remember all the reasons why, but the point I was making that this was a report put out from the International Monetary Fund saying what we thought would work, we failed. And so then to have, the leader who came to speak to us, he said, we didn't understand. He tried to say that everything was working well. But their own document, made that point. Does that make sense? No? Well, right, why they did that? Well, yes, I think it failed because, after World War II, I think most of us, were really very tiny children there. But when they recreated, these United Nations, there was arguments over how money and different things were going to happen. So I've got to think a little bit sometimes. So I think what the IMF did was they sent a lot of money to these countries that was supposed to be used to help things get better. But it didn't happen, and it's not really clear at all what it was. But the IMF believed that if you made a lot of debt to poor countries, and then they would need to pay that debt back. That wasn't working very well because they didn't have enough money to pay back. So they go deeper and deeper and deeper into debt. That makes sense? Yes, and that was what the big debate was about. And it's still there sometimes, like now, about what to do. Like, and then forgiveness. How about the word slipping right from the mouth? Jubilee. What's Jubilee? We know what Jubilee, they talk about it in the Old Testament. What happens on Jubilee every 50th years? All the debt is forgiven. That comes out, and I think, as Christians, we read the Old Testament and we share a lot of what they think. So this idea was to make things level again, because some people were lucky. They were probably hardworking. We're not criticizing them, but they had put a lot of debt out there, and so there was a fear that if there was debt forgiveness, well, then everything would just get bad again, and that's not necessarily the case if the money is used for the right thing. And then having people who in different countries, there's a lot of corruption. There's corruption in our country, isn't there? I would say, so these banks would keep, and I am not an economist. I know some, I took these courses, and I had this wonderful colleague at Cal Lutheran who was from Iran and a brilliant economist, and he had worked for an international community that was just. And so when I was, studying and what I was going to write for my next time, I would always go to him, and he was very earnest. Now, help me understand if I've made anything wrong about this. So that was really something that was meaningful to me, to how, I had a colleague, that we could work together on this. And he was very smart about it. So I think it's still an issue we need to address. Yes, Marilyn.
It sounds to me like the IMF is kind of the opposite of solidarity. Solidarity is standing with the people and
Right.
giving the people some power.
Yes.
Whereas people who have a lot of money, maybe they give it to the banks.
Right.
The
Right.
bank is controlling it. The people don't have. When the people have the power to use the money, it sounds like you're saying,
Yes.
they did good things with it.
Right.
But if you're reluctant to give the people power over the money because you're afraid they'll waste it,
Right.
well, then you've got a top-down kind
Right.
of situation.
I agree. Anyone else? Go ahead, Jan.
I would like to hear one of the stories about, you visited indigenous women's groups who
Right.
were
Thank you.
protecting their environment.
Yes.
I'm particularly interested in Honduras, where an indigenous woman was murdered for her activism in protecting the environment.
Right. Good. Thank you. I wanted us to talk about this. So Berta Caceres was the Lenca leader. The Lencas had indigenous people, the co-founder of COPIN, Civic Council of Popular and Indigenous Organizations of Honduras. And she won a 2015 Gold Environmental Prize for this. Was murdered in her home in La Esperanza on March 2nd, 2016. How many of you know about this? We didn't get a lot of coverage in the U.S., but I was at an event. I got really involved. I was asked to support Palestinians. Philippines, I'm sorry, Filipinos. I also do the other, about some of these issues. And so we were at a big meeting in New York, and I said how I was just coming back from Honduras. And they said, we know about Berta. So they were, in Philippines, she was here. And they talked, it was really touching. She reached out to so many people. And so she had this strong idea of, we need to, let's see, I'll take here. She led a fight against the construction of the Agua Zarca Dam, part of a hydroelectric project that would dry up the Guacarque river. Now, what's going to do that to people growing crops and things like this? So this is where there's a lot of fights in a lot of these countries where they want to take over the water to be used for, well, here's an example. And, Hillary Clinton, I don't dislike, but Hillary Clinton, when she was, the state representative or whatever you called it, she came to Honduras. And she's going to help there. Well, what her help was that they were all going to work to send money to Walmart. The people there couldn't even afford to buy the food then. That you will hear so many people in South America, that's what happens. Is they have these groups coming in from the U.S. and other countries. And this one, like after her assassination, eventually there were different banks like the Netherlands Development Finance Company, the Central American Bank for Economic Integration, and FinFund, they stopped giving money because there was a lot of evidence that it was the rich people in Honduras who murdered her. And we only know some of this because she was in bed, and then there was a man from Mexico, I can't remember his name, but they worked together on these practicing the work they were trying to do. And the killers didn't know he was there. He was in a different room in the bedroom. He saw them. He saw them murder her. And it was just so heart-wrenching. And so we'll go back now to agricultural missions. Agricultural missions had been working with Berta. They knew her. And they went down a week or two after she was killed. And I had been working some with agricultural missions, and I signed up to go there. And we got there, and it was so touching in many ways because we went to see Berta's mother, and she knew the people from, ag missions, and she invited us to her house. And we talked, and we heard her story. She had been a nurse in a lot of poor areas, so she comes from this family that was so involved in their country, and the indigenous people. They had lost a lot of their language. They were bringing the language back. So the powerful people there were fighting against that. And so they were able to finally show that she was assassinated by these high-level companies in Honduras. And if you follow it all, because it's in the news, you know the president of Honduras, who he was sending all the drugs to the U.S. And he was finally, he's being in court here, but he was elected illegally, and he was very oppressive of the people, particularly the indigenous people. And there were two men who had been in a demonstration when he was elected, and they were put in prison. And so we went, this was another time with another group, but it's related to what we're talking about. We went to the prison, and it was like they didn't use any, trying to see how to describe this. They were locked in there, they couldn't see out. We visited. I thought, oh my, I hope we don't get hurt, and I hope this doesn't make anybody unhappy, but that what happened, if something happened to us, Trump might not care, what would happen. So they were in prison there, but interestingly enough, most of the other men that were there knew the kind of good work they were trying to do, and they had committed crimes, but they protected them. Finally, after 3 years, they got out. And then Honduras, as I said, that president was sending all these opioids and that up. And so finally, like a year ago, they have a woman president now. And things are a lot different, so things are better in Honduras. But the role the U.S. played, they had airfields where they brought in, air fighters, and there was a lot of killings, a lot of people there. So that was really, I'm sorry, it's a little too loud. But they stayed together, the group, after this, that had happened. They were so committed to each other, and they had these beautiful murals. They had a place that was like where they would go to just be with each other. And so we were invited to go. And then on the eastern side, there are people, black people who came over to the Honduras area. And so the two groups worked together, you know, the black people with the ones, the indigenous people there, to try to bring about changes. And there's other women in it, but that was the one that we worked most with. Well, I want to say that we had two people. One was a Latino and one was a native from Canada, you know, an indigenous person. They went with us for this time period. And when we were like talking about what was happening, they had a celebration. It was very touching. And they would always say, Berta Vita, she's still alive. And they were celebrating her, but their commitments went so deep. And then Berta lives. And then she has two daughters, and they came to the U.S. and they spoke different times about her, what she wanted to see happen. And one thing was to save that river, and they call the Pachamama. There is no border on our common home, Pachamama. So they worked so hard to make, you know, things change. And there's three different ones that that I went to, but that was the one that I think was the most meaningful. But we were meeting with school teachers, and they were, you know, kind of liberal people. They had to lock their doors because people would come out with guns that were sent there by this president. This is the worst case. And the ways that they just stood up against them was really powerful. So anyway, we had to meet with the U.S. ambassador, and we go there to talk. And we were talking about all this mistreatment, all the things that not to change. And you know what he said every time? That's above my pay grade. That is above my pay grade. And I tell you that people from Ag Missions were really upset about that. But then there's these things that they do, like in 2014, when there was, you know, we were having these, what was it, every year or every few years, you know, these big meetings. What are we going to do about the climate? Remember that? What are we going to do about the climate? So when ordinary people were there, they couldn't even get into the building to hear all this. So in 2014 then, these groups of women we had a people's meeting and what we were going to do. And they would take and put these beautiful flowers and everything on the ground, welcoming and that. And they were talking about what they wanted to happen, you know, there, to have a more just country. And I think they made some progress. And then there were stories like we went way up high in the mountains where there's a big river, and there were indigenous people there where they were coming in and mining. And they were trying to stop this mining, and again, it contaminated the water. And, you know, they were getting pushback, and it was mainly Canadian and U.S. companies that were doing this. And so it was like, okay, what are we going to do about this? So there was a lot of pressure put on. I can't say it all won, but then there were people there from all over, and we had this big march, and we had like a tent. And every once in a while, a picture of it shows up on Facebook of me and this group, because we were just marching all around. And the people from Latin America were so happy that some of these white people from the U.S. had come there to be with them. And, you know, we made our demands, and, you know, there's a still struggle there. Does that answer the question? Yeah, okay, good. So if you want, there's this, she mentioned the book it's in, and for 3 years, we weren't allowed to give away too many copies of our chapter. But now the 3 years up, so if you want to read more about this, you can take these and learn more about it. But I think I gave you an overview of what it is. So thank you. Now more questions. Any more?
Questions?
Where's your next trip?
Well, I don't fly so much anymore, you know, like all those years with the World Council of Churches and that. But I've really gotten spirituality out in the outdoors. And so when I was in California, there was a woman who developed these outdoor churches, you know, and the spirituality. And so they're meeting in Ireland, and I've always wanted to go to Ireland for 6 weeks. And there'll be people there, and we're going to look at the spiritual Celtic spirituality. And after all the things we've gone through and that we live through now, I thought, I want to do this. So yes, that's going to be probably my last trip.
What was your scariest moment in all these trips?
You know, it's interesting, people ask that and they said, aren't you afraid? And I was in some ways, you know, particularly that time when we were in that prison and were we going to get out? And then this was just there. This was really scary. That then the top person of the prison came and told us, the people, the staff, well, guess what? They were all gangs. You could see the way they were dressed. They were gangs. That's just how. I mean, Honduras was one of the very worst countries. So, you know, you're kind of afraid, are we going to get out here? But we were able to get out. But here's how I thought about it. And I think you all may know some of these people. Like, help me with their names. Who, Art Gish, you know, he and Peggy. All the places they went, how did he die? He got run over by his tractor. And I mean, I love these people, but this is how I put it into perspective.
In Athens, Ohio.
Yeah, in Ohio. And then I know them because I was at college with them here.
Phil and Louie.
Yeah, from Louis. I love them. Right. They were some of my favorite people. So I thought, and I would sometimes tell people, well, let me tell you what happened to my friends who were in these really dangerous areas, and they were never hurt. And, you know, how did they die? Just a simple thing like that. So, and also my children were grown up, and I just felt like this was my calling. This was my calling.
And I remember as a teenager hearing you being in Chicago at the Ecumenical Institute and having to lay on the floor because of the bricks being thrown through the windows above your heads. That was always one that was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I forgot to give you the mic.
You forgot to give me the mic. Well, it's just how I'm Bev Brubaker.
She's 4 years younger than I am. My
Pam's
wonderful
younger sister. But I just remembered when I was 14 or 15 and you were in Chicago at the Ecumenical Institute, and that's when the racial strife was horrific.
That's
in
true.
the 60s. And you were at the EI and you described that you had to lay on the floor with the other folks there while bricks were being thrown into the windows above you going over your head.
Yeah, that's true. That was probably the scariest time. But then you also had, you know, the people there who knew the work that the church did and the hospital, and they said, stop. They're here to help. Stop. And then when I went back for BBS, my grandmother said, you're going to cause my son to die, really, because you were hearing all the things that were happening there, and they was just sure I was going to get killed. But from my experience before, I didn't think I was going to get killed, and I wasn't. Anything else?
How are you feeling now? Are there things that give you hope, Pam, that you hear that are going on, and some of the connections that you have? What good things are happening?
Marilyn's question is about where is hope?
Yes, right. That's a good one. Well, I struggle with this. I'll be honest. And like right now, you know, what's happening in Palestine and Israel. I was going through some things, and in 2010, I don't think I said this here yet, did I? That I had gone to with the Christian peacemaker teams.
No, you didn't.
Yeah, to Israel. It was 2010, and it was a group of students mainly from Manchester, and I went, and we oh. At times it was just so heart-wrenching. We would see the houses that were torn out on the West Bank. We didn't go into Gaza, but that were torn down. And then I brought some dates from Palestine to give to her from Equal Exchange, because they're paying good money to the people there. So, you know, that does give me some hope that there are you know, people that that do care. And then anyway, I read, we had a weekly chapel, and you know, I wasn't ordained, but I was a professor of religion and social ethics, and I wrote about my time in Israel and Palestine. And I thought, it's still happening. It's still happening. But, you know, the majority of people in the US do not support that. A lot of Jewish people don't support what's happening in Gaza, you know, and a lot of people, you know, are in the streets trying to stop it. So in some ways, I feel more hopeful. That's a good question, because some people have had enough of this, of these killings, these children and that. So there's enough people speaking out, and they're doing it nonviolently. That's so important. That's what we learned from Martin Luther King, was that. And that gives me hope. I mean, I still like worry some, and I think, yes. How about you all? Do you have hope? Can you tell me kind of the hope you have? What?
A lot of the young people are speaking out, though.
Yes, they are.
They did when we were younger.
Uh-huh.
Now there are young people in college that are saying, this is not okay, this is not okay, this is not okay. Unfortunately, there are powerful people that are trying to
Right.
them and
Yeah, like Columbia University, which is right across from you know my seminary. They really took all the ones who were protesting and arrested them, and then they also fired the president because they felt the president wasn't doing enough to help the Jewish members, but a person who was there said some of the people that were saying stop saying anti-Semitic things to them were Palestinians. Yes, so that gives me hope. You know, that gives me hope. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Pam. We're really glad you're here.
I was really glad to come. Thank you. And I could tell you looked pretty engaged. It made me happy, even though I stuttered a few times. Thank you.
I get rid of that thing.
Yeah.